Well, we're live.
Okay, hi everyone. The joys of doing things live. So welcome to Digi.City's first virtual Digi.City Connect. Very excited to be here. My name is Chelsea Collier, and I have the great privilege of being with three esteemed speakers and experts in cities in the future of pretty much everything. First, Joseph Koffler from the Gray Line Group, and Joseph's bio is just about as long as you can get it. He is a successful entrepreneur, a speaker, an author, a coach, military officer, an executive in residence at the University of Texas, a teacher, an investor, a mentor. I think I could keep going with nouns.
No need to. I just haven't figured out what I want to be when I grow up, but I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, and deeply invested in Austin. So thanks for joining us. Next, Bonnie Reese is the strategy director and digital experience design with Gensler, is really focused on human-centered design and what's happening in our urban environments, and including what's happening interior to buildings, thanks to her work at Gensler. She's got a long track record in this human-centered design, formerly of Frog Design, and also a lecturer with UT Austin. And finally, Janelle Moffett is with the Downtown Austin Alliance, where she's the director of research there. She's also a UT grad, so you see lots of University of Texas connections here. She's on the board of Austin City Up, on the board of directors, and also is a leader in the in the Urban Land Institute. So you can start to see the thread between all of these different speakers. And so when I was choosing speakers for this live stream, I thought, who's deeply invested in Austin, who really has the experience, but different levels of experience, and who's really centered on success for our city, and also with technology at the center. So what we're talking about here today is obviously influenced by the global pandemic. But what we're really honestly talking about is the transition that Austin has been in for, I guess, since since the beginning of kind of community building in Austin. I can't say to the formation of Austin, because maybe that was a bit longer than when we want to go back. But the idea is that Austin is rapidly changing, and the global pandemic is just accelerating that. So knowing that we cannot predict the future whatsoever, we do know that things will be different. So we're here to talk about what does it mean for Austin? What is the role of technology? How do we want to embrace change? How do we want to influence that change with the digital evolution at that centerpiece? And where and how do we work? What do we want the future of our city to look like? So again, thank you for joining us, all of you. And I'll take just a second to talk about how this is all going to work. Again, this is our first live event, so we're really just kind of taking it one step at a time. That's like the great connector between all of us around the world, taking each minute and day by its own time. So I've done panelist intros, and next I'm going to ask each of them just to go a bit deeper in terms of who they are, what they really, really care about, and then kind of what they see for the future of Austin based on their own area of expertise. And then we'll go through a list of questions. We received about 100 questions from lots of different folks, and really excited to go through and explore those topics. We merge them together. So instead of doing like one-on kind of questions, we'll merge these based on a kind of 6 or 7 different topics, depending on how much time we have to get through. And then we'll go from there. How does that sound, everybody?
Sounds great.
Okay, cool. Bonnie, let's start with you. Maybe a bit more than the short, brief bio that I gave, and then what you're really focused on related to the future of Austin and what all this change means for all of us.
So, I think it's a question. My area of focus, as Chelsea said, is human-centered design. And one of the things that we have to think about is experience. And what are those things that, obviously we're experiencing right now, and how do we want to shape experiences in the urban landscape in the future to be both human and to be smart in terms of being able to manage and keep us healthy and safe and employed and all of those things. And, one of the things that obviously everyone must be seeing is there is this sort of recognition that we've had a catalyst for change. And one of the things that scares me the most is that at this moment, everyone's trying to make the decision about the changes now, whether those are in the workplace or they're in the urban environment or they're in retail. And they're saying, this is what we have to change and this is what it should look like. And I think the most important thing that we need to be thinking about is not what is the answer, but what are the experiments we need to conduct to arrive at the right answer. Yeah. And those experiments are everything from prototyping with technology to understanding how humans are responding to these different new stimuluses in their environment. And, one of the things that, Chelsea, we've talked a little bit about is also data. So while we're thinking about, obviously a very complex issue, but it's coming to the forefront as we recognize the importance of contact tracing as a very targeted, often we talk about data and it's just overwhelming. Like what data, which data, what am I giving up? People, from the research I've done, people don't know and understand what's going on in the exchange of their data. When is it happening? And what does that mean for them or for society? And there is right now a very specific moment where we understand that being able to do contact tracing, and not that that's the sum of it, but that contact tracing is something that could drive value around helping trace and be able to kind of control pandemics and the spread of things. And yet at the same time, there's questions around privacy with that, et cetera. I think the other thing that we have to think about is how are we helping people understand what they're giving up and getting back? So we need to have real conversations around what is the exchange when it comes to data. Again, whether that's the workplace or the urban environment. And finally, as we think about, let's just talk about walking into work. There's a lot of talk about how do we employ and think about technology that's looking at temperature. Let's just take that one. Yeah. Well, everyone's like, okay, there's a someone has a fever. That's great that we've captured that. But let's stop and think about what happens when that sensor goes off, right or wrong, because we know sensors aren't always right. With, what is the sound that happens? What does that do to everyone else in the room? How is like a small thing like that suddenly going to start to create a space of fear? So one of the questions I would also sort of put out to us in relationship to technology in the urban environment, giving us feedback, is how do we give feedback that is, one, accurate, two, creating kind of a willingness to continue an exchange if indeed you're making that decision consciously. And then third, isn't triggering alarm bells that are scary for everyone at a time that we are kind of very carefully moving back into shared environments.
Yeah. You bring up a couple really great important parts, but one that I really want to nail down on, which is, this conversation is focused on technology, and it's really easy to focus on the specific technology, the specific application. But what we've done with Digi.City is really look at technology as it enables the human experience. And that goes to exactly what you're talking about, which is, okay, we can collect data with sensors that's enabled by connected infrastructure. But then once we have that data, how do we use that to thoughtfully inform how we humanly react? And I think that's a really important theme that I want to keep going throughout this entire conversation. Janelle, so please just give a little introduction and hello to everyone. You're really focused on the urban core of Austin. I know you've done just massive amounts of research, and I really appreciate that you have a real sense and a pulse of what's happening in the urban core of Austin. So tell us your perspective and what you're learning.
Yeah, thanks, Chelsea. These are very interesting times. And what's so interesting about it is that working in a downtown, looking at other downtowns across the country and across the world, we see a very hyper-local context, right? Where you see people responding in unique ways, and you understand that no one really has the right answer. And that's where technology sort of plays into part. That's where smart infrastructure and And a lot of data collection sort of plays a part because we're all trying to figure something out. And this is a very, very unique time because we've never experienced this before. And so looking at the changes in downtown specifically, it's impacting all the industries. People are adjusting in different ways. And you can really tell a lot about your city and about your urban core by the way that different industries are adjusting. You know, we're looking at our hotel and tourism industry that's really hit hard, and there's not a big response to how you adjust to that, how you adjust to the significant losses, or the live music industry and the need for being able to have groups and to meet in group settings. You never, some of these things you just take for granted. You think that you can always go to a store and just buy what you need at any time, and you don't anticipate standing in lines or having 6 feet apart. So these are very interesting times, and working in a downtown environment, you really value seeing this data in real time. You know, we track pedestrian counts, we track mobility in and out of the core, and these stark, deep declines have really taught us, you know, you value congestion, you value some of these things that we worked so hard to sort of change, and you're looking at how cities are shaped differently. And I think it's very important to have these conversations within a smart city context, because it tells us that there aren't solutions out there, that we must continue to also learn and engage other people, have conversations, so that we could constantly work towards an answer that is going to be somewhat temporary, because we're just an evolving group. And so my role at the Downtown Austin Alliance is Director of Research and Analysis, and I'm privileged to be able to look at data and speak with other subject matter experts about these changing conditions. You know, Bonnie brought up a great point about, you know, the experience and human experience, and we're looking at the workforce and how people are talking about the changes in human experience and the customer experience, the worker experience, and these things weren't really talked about in a deep way in the past, and now everyone sort of has a voice, and you could ask yourself, well, do I feel comfortable going into a downtown or going into an urban environment or traveling to a city? Now you're put in the driver's seat as a consumer to then sort of redefine what the goals of experience and, you know, human happiness looks like. And I think it's very interesting. I'm just happy to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, an important part of the conversation. And that's the real case for smart cities overall, right? Is, you know, we can state that we're, before even the global pandemic, we're in this period of rapid change. We really can't anticipate what's happening next. And then the pandemic just exacerbated that to a level that none of us quite anticipated or frankly wanted. However, here we are, but the ability to capture data and make decisions in real time, both as an individual and then as a policymaker, I think is making the case for ethical, thoughtful applications of smart cities more than ever. So yeah, thanks for that. Joseph, last but certainly not least.
Oh.
Yeah, I know doing your bio takes about 40 minutes, so we can't.
My mother wrote it, and anytime you get a chance, have your mother write your biography. It just sounds so much better.
I don't know if I'm going to challenge my mother to do that, but yeah, so just give us what you're thinking about right now. I know you're looking at a lot of intersections and kind of cross sections of this whole world. So what's pulling your attention more than anything?
Yeah, well, and thank you, Chelsea, for letting me be a part of this discussion. It's great to be alongside some big thinkers like this. So you teed it up perfectly. You say the intersections of so many things happening at once, and that really is the story of my biography and how it allows me to see this perhaps a little differently than other people. So the better part of my military career, 20 years, was spent in both the tactical level and the strategic level. In other words, boots on the ground doing the real work, and sometimes at a strategic level, looking across the whole organization. And that also allowed me to see what the future of work was doing, because the military was very focused on technology, very focused on empowering individuals to make decisions to power down. Okay, so that was happening. Then I get out into the startup world where we're starting from scratch, having to build it, having to use all services and resources, public, private, nonprofit. So I got to see how all these things blend together. And then the third piece was when I was running for Congress and seeing how our government functions or doesn't function, how people participate or don't participate.
Yeah.
All that was coming together simultaneously. So what I see in all of this is, and this is played out in the book that we wrote a few years back called Catalyst, which is
great book, by the way. Get it. We'll provide the link below.
I'll drop the link down in here. In fact, as I'm looking down in the comments that people are leaving, my nephew Logan Cheek popped on. So Logan, how are you?
Cool.
Good study in the afternoon.
Yeah.
But all this comes together to say simply that COVID is merely a catalyst to just speed up what was already happening. And, you know, I know the focus is on Austin, but this really applies to most cities around the world. And very nicely, it shows the constant dependency between cities and rural areas and them having to work together because you can't have one without the other. And so we can take this conversation anywhere you want to go, but that's my overly long, quick bio.
Yeah, no, it's great. And the interconnectedness of these things just can no longer be questioned, whether we're talking about urban and rural, whether we're talking about supply chains, whether we're just talking about how we relate to one another. And then you add the digital piece of it on top of that. You know, I really don't like the term silver linings, but I think that is definitely one takeaway from this whole exacerbated experience. So let's focus on a couple of different topics. And again, the questions that came through were really thoughtful and really good from folks who were tuning in. One of the biggest things that came through, obviously mostly from people living in Austin, is, you know, we've seen our population double at least every 10 years. Pre-COVID-19, seemed like everyone wanted to move to Austin, and some of the infrastructure, both digital and physical, was starting to strain. So now that we're in this pandemic reality, all of the news is saying that people are leaving more dense areas and are moving to less dense areas. Again, I don't want to make predictions about what's going to happen because, in my opinion, futurists are out of a job effective 3 months ago. We all just have to kind of take it one step at a time. However, you know, if more people are coming to Austin, how are we going to prepare and how are we going to support our city leaders in making the right decisions about what needs to happen, both in a physical and especially related to this conversation, a digital infrastructure? Do you all think Austin is prepared? And if not, what do we need to do next? And I'll invite anyone to jump in. We're all friends and family here.
I guess I would say if you look back to kind of Austin's plan that was rolled out, I can't remember how many years ago, but you know that we're in the midst of implementing, which was looking at sort of creating localized hubs that had everything you needed. So to improve walkability and everything else. And the one thing I'll say through this, and in full disclosure, I'm actually kind of spending a year abroad. I'm in Munich right now, so experiencing this pandemic here in Germany, which is a different perspective, and returning to Austin in August. But Austin is, you know, has been trying to develop these hyper localized communities, and I can imagine that has been, as it has for us, you know, this. We've all had to come, we're looking for where we can walk, you know, as we try to stay close to home. And, you know, your local park is probably more important than ever. I know it is for me here. And also local, you know, as businesses are opening, you know, keeping it again kind of local. And so I think there's an opportunity here for us to kind of take this moment to rethink these hyper local hubs that exist. I think there is an incredible amount of complexity in the strategies around mobility in the city. A battle that Austin hasn't really been winning of late, but certainly battling. And I actually am not sure what the answer is, beyond the fact that I think we're going to start to see probably, you know, employers playing more of a role, especially as we move towards autonomous vehicles, of having fleets, so that, you know, the days you choose to go to work or the days that you need to go to work, your workday starts when you enter the vehicle that is sort of either sent for you or that is part of your kind of package. And so we're going to start seeing the front door change to the vehicle. But what does that mean in terms of solving Austin's problems? I'm not sure, except for the opportunity for employers to play a role in helping coordinate how those vehicles and the times of those vehicles moving about the city to move away from just pure 9 to 5.
Yeah, and I'll just pile on that. Jeremy Surrey, who is a professor at the University of Texas, has a podcast called This is Democracy. I just dropped the link, and for those that are following this on Facebook, and he just interviewed a subject matter expert on city and urban design, and they talked to just your point, Bonnie, about this idea of the walkability factor, this 15 to 20 minute community where you can walk anywhere. And this is an opportunity for a number of reasons, not just COVID related, but we don't want to go back, as Janelle was saying earlier, to the old bad stuff like traffic jams per se. This is really a chance to reinvent.
Yeah, I would just add to that the concept of work and what does work look like? What does a workspace look like? So if you're building a city that now needs to be walkable, compact and connected, I think you were referring to Imagine Austin, Bonnie, the comprehensive plan for Austin. And this concept around these hubs and how does that relate to where you live, and creating those connections between our major transportation infrastructure and making sure those nodes meets the needs of those people in the areas. And if work changes, which it sounds like work is changing, then all of those plans that are based on a demand model has to take a new look. It has to look at how people are moving. It has to look at Austin and the high concentration of tech jobs here, and how a lot of these agencies or industries are moving to work from home as an option, not necessarily for full time, but now that that option has been explored, we have to take a hard look at that as a major strategy for our city. And with that, thinking about these nodes and how best to support people in their particular areas. So if there are groceries or schools or other aspects, what about the digital divide in which the different generations need to be able to have access to healthcare and technology? We look at the schools and how different schools fare differently during this time. So planning as we know it has changed. Cities as we know it has changed. And part of the challenge is we have to continue to have the conversation and try a lot of things, like Bonnie said earlier on. We have to not be afraid of experimenting and testing out these use cases and driving towards different strategies, because it's not a one size fits all. I don't know if a comprehensive plan will get it, but we need to have sort of this agile approach to making sure that we can help as many people as possible adjust.
And isn't it also cool, you two, the way you brought up that point about healthcare and schools, how it's, to Chelsea, your point, everything's connected.
Yeah.
Fascinating that in any community, city, town, no matter where they are, that the most essential, the key and essential that keep food on shelves, that keep people moving, keep gas pumped and filled and stocks and shelves stocked, are people that often don't have access to the healthcare, don't have access to the education, don't have access to easy transportation, don't have access to so many of the things that the people that are staying at home are enjoying, if you want to call it that. I just think this whole topsy-turvy world that we're in right now gives us a chance to do better going forward.
Absolutely. And one of the stats that I've been tracking is that pre-pandemic, less than 4% of people worked from home. And now, while we're right in the middle of it, almost 50% of people are working from home. And again, that's tracking a very specific group of people, and related to the digital divide. Our community is fortunate to be made of all kinds of different people. The more diverse the community, the better. And that's been proven through academic research for a very long time. So just looking at work from home and how that impacts employers and how that impacts healthcare and how that impacts education. Now, all of a sudden, we're all being affected. And of course, that impacts transportation, right? So in the past, all of these different sectors would do their 10-year plans, their 15-year outlooks. And now what we're having to do, to your point, Janelle, is just be as agile as possible. But in order to do that, you have to have a solid foundation and a platform on which to build. So one more thing that I'd like for us just to riff on a little bit is, we're putting a lot of pressure on government leaders right now to make those decisions and those the transitions really, really quickly, and they need some air cover in order to experiment, in order to be more agile. So I'm just wondering if there are any thoughts around that in terms of how we could bring in you all as big thinkers to support our city leaders and help encourage some of the foundation setting.
Yeah, I think it's a question, I guess. We're always happy to think and partner with them. I think how do you provide air cover is partially how do you start to communicate out proactively to citizens. So much of this is an exercise in trust, right? And we're seeing distrust creating waves of problems as people assume intents, even if they weren't the original intent, et cetera. So how do we build trust with technology, with the government? And I think that's about real communication and feedback. Mm-hmm. And that feedback might be a digital display that tells you what data it's collecting from you and what information it's gleaning to make the space safer. So if there's a certain level of, I don't want to say transparency, because no one wants to know everything that's going on. We'd be overwhelmed. But I think, nor should they. And I think the same is true about government. How do you create and open up that communication channel in order to say, we're working on this, you can expect to see these things. People want to understand what they're going to see before it happens, even if you don't know exactly how it's going to be received. So I think more than ever, the communication needs to go hand in hand with the experiments we're kind of talking about.
Yeah. And Janelle, your work with the Downtown Austin Alliance, you're right in the middle of convening between city and perhaps even county government. I don't know the answer to that question. And large employers and workforce and retailers and everyone in between. So how do you all play that convening role, and what opportunities do you think are there?
Yeah, I think in terms, we definitely play a role in different rooms, different conversations, but I think what we learned during this most recent time is the need to have data, making data-informed decisions. And part of that is having these milestones that people could sort of wrap their head around. While you cannot be transparent about everything, this is an information age. People want to know. And so when you make a rule or a law or a mandate about something, qualify it with some sort of data, driven metrics, some sort of indicator that says, well, once we hit this milestone, then we feel like we can go to this next level, so that people could sort of plan and adjust and understand why those decisions are made. And I think that helps with the transparency, that helps with having those creative and courageous conversations, because there is a lot of information out there. There's a lot of dashboards out there. There's a lot of decisions being made by our local government, state government, federal government. They're not always aligned. And I think part of it is that we don't know, everyone doesn't have this shining star or this gold star that we know that if we hit that will be it. We have the assumption within public policy that you're doing what's best for the community. And so just having some of those milestone or indicator sort of language in place to help get the community, more people to the table. A lot of times there's not a lot of opportunity to bring different voices to the table. Usually policy leaders connect with other policy leaders. And, in the tech field, it's really hard to sort of engage in that space. And a lot of the subject matter experts who are making the tools or making the decisions to change how we involve or how we change our cities essentially aren't always at the table. So having those conversations with business leaders and local leaders with those shared milestones, I think is a good way to go.
Perfectly said. And Joseph, you got to see this both on the campaign trail, in addition to, the long legacy of public policy that you have. What are your thoughts on this in terms of the intersection integration?
Well, I want to go back to the word you said a few minutes ago, which is this idea of allowing or providing top cover for elected officials to do some things differently. We have to see this as a moment where just because we had a policy or a rule or a procedure or a tradition does not mean we have to keep doing that. Conversely, this is also a great time for business and government to realize, hey, we're doing some new things. What do we want to keep going forward, doing it this new way, as opposed to going backwards and doing it the old way? A good example of that is the use of sidewalks in any city, whether it be residential or whether it be in a downtown area. We're going to want to make sure that we're keeping a little bit of distance, which means we want just as many people, but just as many people with a little more distance.
Sure.
We're going to be a little wider. That's just one example to be able to say, maybe we need a few less parallel parking cars on the street, and maybe we need a little bit wider sidewalks. And people have been talking about walkability and sidewalks for a long time. This is just the catalyst to say, maybe this is the time we do it. And, there's a dozen more ideas of that.
Yeah, that's a really great example. I want to go back to something that was mentioned earlier in our conversation. Definitely a priority for a lot of people who wrote in questions, was that idea around the digital divide, and making sure when we're talking about accessibility and when we're talking about the connectivity piece of accessibility in cities, we're being inclusive of our entire community. So I just wanted to give that as a very broad topic before I shape the conversation. Wondered if anybody had any broad kind of thoughts about that.
I'll just be super quick. It's about broadband. It's about, if we're going to do telemedicine, it's not just in the cities, but it's rural. But even within cities, we have entire deserts where there's no Wi-Fi. City of Austin and many others have been driving public school buses around as mobile hotspots. Now, great, I applaud the innovation, but it makes me embarrassed as a citizen of a community that we have that many people that don't have access to the new economy.
Yeah, and we're going to need new approaches. I could not agree more. And again, the pandemic as a catalyst has just brought this to home very clearly and made it an absolute priority. Cities have been talking about digital divide for decades. However, now it is no longer a nice to have, it is an imperative. And to Janelle's point, we're going to need all sorts of different sectors together, really showing up and being honest and using real-time technology and data to inform those decisions.
Yeah, I think it's also, there's an opportunity right now. Employers, the one thing that's happening is all employers are thinking about, how do we change our real estate portfolios in order to map to a world where people are going to be working from home. And sometimes it's a reduction, but often it's a reinvention of how do we make our spaces more purposeful around what will bring people to the office. But the other thing they're having to think about is, how do we ensure that technology at home is bulletproof in order to be able to deliver a consistent experience. And while the current disaster is a pandemic, the next one might be weather related. So there's lots of things to think about that make planning for cyclical challenges impacting and forcing work from home. And so I guess one of the challenges I would put out there is employers look to invest in creating the right work from home environment, is how can we look to make that as broad as possible? So it's not just about the employee, but it's about ensuring a whole city, everyone is ready to work and learn from home. And so the model doesn't become employer to employee. It becomes, we have this many people in this city, and so we are collaboratively contributing to ensure the right infrastructure to keep that city online in a way that can drive, an uninterrupted experience for workers and students.
Yeah. I was really happy to see the efforts between a startup that's relocating to Austin called Ruckus and Austin Freenet. Because digital divide, of course, yes, absolutely about connectivity and also about hardware. Not everybody has access to a device. And also the digital literacy tools to make sure that there's a positive environment around digital learning. And so I was very excited to see Austin Freenet really get on board and start distributing some of those laptops or pads, iPads, or digital screens that's beyond a mobile phone, so students can learn. There's 15,000 students in the city of Austin and the greater community that don't have access to that hardware. So, Janelle, what are you seeing in terms of employers? And I know you're specifically focused on downtown, but that's a majority of where our employers are in Austin. So what are you seeing in terms of digital divide and how those employers are looking at this?
Well, I think it's a slightly different conversation for downtown employees specifically. The office tenants, most of those employers probably have businesses that have employees that can work from home. I think the challenge more for urban core is the tax base or the tax loss. That if that were to be business as usual going forward, we need to think about large groups of downtown employees now working from home versus working in the downtown core. In addition to the businesses that thrive off of a large employee base. So downtown currently has about 100,000 employees in downtown. And if that number were to be reduced significantly, that will change, how people are using downtown. That's not even including the first floor storefront retail businesses and the tourism industry that impacts downtown. And so thinking about the digital divide and how people use technology to do work is part of it. But the other part of it is just the economic impact of how all of these things work together. And so when you create these large shifts like working from home or creating a place for people to stay in their pockets and not convene as a group, I think it changes our community, it changes our society and how we sort of engage with each other, how we are social with each other, and how business is done. Last year, we talked about an innovation district and this whole concept of the bump theory, where new terms and ideas come together as people are co-located in a similar space. And so there's a lot of benefits, or I guess losses, you have when you don't have that bump factor, when one company can't sort of walk next to another company and sort of share those ideas. And so, having technology and creating that, I think that's part of the conversation is, yes, we do need technology. We do need to have major investments in sort of internet and investment all across the city, right? It's part of just surviving, right? It's like a minimum requirement, but being creative, not just adding that, but being creative on how do you balance, people still engaging with their classmates if they're a student, or still engaging with the workforce if they're employees. I think it's not a simple fix to just run, broadband everywhere. We have to have these sort of conversations to keep being social and not, having just Zoom calls every day. There's a health factor to it. There's a community factor to it. There's a human factor to it that we need to think about as we create these plans and solve for the digital divide.
Yeah. So it's what I love about what you're saying is we basically have to create a physical and a virtual bump factor. And so what are the tools that we need to do that? What are the structures we need to do that? And how do policies need to change? In a sense, I think it's really easy to look to government and say, government has to fix it. But that is no longer the case, specifically when you're dealing with decreasing tax bases. Everyone is having to do a lot more with a lot less. And this, I don't want to say levels the playing field, but it presses the reset button for sure. And so I think that we are all tasked in redefining what that next thing looks like. I don't have any idea what that could be, but I believe that collectively, with all the passionate, bright, creative people that we have in this city, if there's a willingness to really come together across sector, public sector, private sector, startups, academics, community leaders, nonprofits, advocates, everyone coming together and saying, here's what I think, here's what I have, here's what I need. Now, how do we redefine this? Not that that's a simple thing.
Yeah, it's the Apollo 13 moment where failure is not an option. And that scene where the engineers come and dump all the pieces and parts on the table that were up in the capsule, 100,000 miles up in space, and said, figure out how to put a square peg in a round hole. Do it.
Yeah,
and that's our
time limit.
Yep.
But also, just to be clear, we're doing a lot of research around people, especially with employees and how they feel about working from home and everything else. And people don't want to work from home 100% of the time forever. So, I mean, I think, again, it's really important for us to recognize we're going through a period and we're going to need to be able to seamlessly move back and forth at given moments in order to be able to work from home. But I think there really is, people want to come together more than ever. I mean, everyone's realized how much we need that.
Yeah.
And so how are we purposeful about that from a business perspective, from an experience perspective, from a wellness perspective, in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, which isn't to say that there aren't going to be some challenges with the economics of it all, but
I miss places too, Bonnie.
Can you hear it? And we're ahead of you all with our opening. So,
yeah. So let's talk about urban design a little bit. We kind of touched on it a bit, but I think the real opportunity with this group of you all is to talk about technology and urban design and how what we know now starts to influence some of how the city could shape. And maybe that means buildings look different. Maybe that means streets look different. Maybe that means transportation looks different, or maybe there's small adjustments. I don't know. Just wanted to open it up and see if you had any thoughts there.
I got tons, but Janelle, go ahead. You go first.
Yeah.
Urban design, it's not in my space, but I can talk some rumors,
Rumors are cool.
Well, you start with the rumors and then I'll pick up with some other stuff that I'm hearing too.
Yeah, I'm hearing, spaces are being redesigned for employees to be, further or separated, when you think about engaging having employees feel more comfortable. So there's the one part where the employer wants to be responsible and do their due diligence and making sure that their workplace is safe and welcoming for that employee to come back, but also putting things into place so that physically the employee now feels like this is a place that they can come. To Bonnie's point, employees, there are a lot of people who want to work from home, but they're just saying that right now. Like we want to get back in the groove of having friends and going to the break room and walking down the street and picking our restaurant and doing some of these social human things. And I think right now more than ever, having a workplace that sort of mirrors this open space of connectivity while being safe is the balance, right? How do you handle elevators? How do you handle doors? How do you handle buttons? Like it can get really specific in terms of how buildings are structured. But at the same time, if the technology for a vaccine beats the technology for reconfiguring urban space, maybe these conversations are temporary. I mean, it's to my earlier point is that right now we're in a space where we're just responding to what we are experiencing. But if on the health side, if there are innovations within that and there's a vaccine that's developed and we have then found the cure and all of these other things that we're not talking about on this call, but if that were to happen, it reshapes how we're thinking about it. Do we create long-term, changes to our building? Do we create long-term changes to our streets? Do we create long-term changes to our city? And if there is a vaccine, how does that impact our decision-making? So I will leave it to the to the experts on the call to talk about that.
Yeah, I'll go real brief because I want to bridge to hear what Bonnie has to say, but which is I'll give 2 detailed points on what you just mentioned. So elevator buttons. I love that. I keep hearing people say, and I'm not picking on you, Jen, I'm just saying elevator buttons in general. It's like, do you know how easy that is for us to innovate our way through that? I mean, I could do it like with a shoebox and a button that is voice activated that literally hits the button. I mean, so there are going to be simple things like that. And then there's also going to be, to your point, Janelle, there's going to be employers that say, okay, well, we can only put one person on the elevator at a time. The math says that normally you used to put 20 people on an elevator. So now we're going to need more time to get our people to and from work, which just simply means we have more flexible schedules. More people showing up early, more people showing up late on purpose by design. And that small incremental change allows a major catalyst moment like COVID to be less impactful because we're doing things to be able to stay safe.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important things that we're often designing for better or for worse, is people's expectations. And so there's a huge opportunity right now that expectations have been disrupted to make some different decisions, and that window will close. I mean, even things like we're designing, we'll be partnering with the developer and designing a large building. And, even though theoretically everyone's on board trying to incentivize people to take less cars, they're like, well, the employees won't work for me if I don't give them this many parking spaces. And there we are back with an inability to actually negatively influence people to consider other options because they'll get their parking space. And I think that's one example. Like at this moment right now, we could stop and reinvestigate some of these ruts we're in as a society. And I think we have to look to building a kind of flexibility is going to be key. My biggest fear is that we're designing for the 3 months after COVID. And this is not going to be how it is forever, but we are going to be facing other significant challenges. We were facing them before and perhaps not really acknowledging the weight of them.
Yeah.
There is an opportunity for us to think about the systems that we put in place in order to support different ways of living, different ways of being inclusive, different ways of, thinking about creating jobs, quite frankly. I mean, to me right now, it's like, okay, we have an opportunity and there's a need to create jobs. What jobs do we want to create? What value might those jobs drive that don't exist right now?
Right.
How do we train up a group of people who might have shied away from embracing technology or thinking that's not for me, and say, hey, we've got the right program to help you put the infrastructure in place in our cities. Mm-hmm. So it feels like an incredible moment of opportunity for us. And I just hope we can figure out how to respond to it collectively.
Yeah, Bonnie, I love your point about designing for the 3 months after COVID, which is to remind everyone on this call, after 9/11, there were those people that said there will never be a person working in a tall building again. Mm-hmm. And not only did that prove to be wrong, but we now have even taller buildings around the world. But what we did differently was we learned from the mistakes of why those 2 buildings were so susceptible to that kind of an explosion. And we're just engineering them better going forward. Mm-hmm. And that, to your point, I think is the opportunity.
Yeah. And there's a real opportunity as well for the area of prop tech, which is the marriage of property and technology. So it's how buildings are designed from a technology perspective. And that doesn't mean it has to be a brand new building going up. You can, infiltrate prop tech into existing buildings. It's a little harder, but it's the whole idea of understanding what's happening with all of the different systems, whether that's an elevator system, an HVAC system, lighting systems, all sorts of ideas to where exactly what's happening in that building at all times, and people's personal information is not captured, but you get to see how people are using buildings, and then you can adjust how that building operates. And there's a large kind of technology piece behind it that I find absolutely fascinating. But again, it's that idea of technology can be our friend in this if it's thoughtfully designed and integrated. And then looking at how developers and employers and folks who operate in build and design and own those buildings, how those different sectors come together with city leadership and city government so that you can make decisions faster in that urban core and be more resilient and more responsive and more responsible, I think is important too. So we're almost out of time. We've got about 10 minutes left. We've talked, I know, it went really fast. We've talked about systems design, urban design, what policies need to change, the role of technology, the digital divide. We touched a little bit on the future of work and how we need to anticipate how people's roles will change. Do we want to go down that path a little bit further? Joseph, I know you're doing a lot of work in this area around, what skills do we need to enable? How can we anticipate what roles will need to be filled? Will we be ready? You want to talk about that for a little bit?
Yes, thank you. So, and I'll be as quick as I can, which as you know, is hard to do.
You're great.
So we already knew that the trends were going in the wrong direction, meaning that there weren't enough people trained and qualified for the jobs that are required of the 21st century.
No.
COVID now is just making that even more obvious. And for those people that have lost jobs and have been told to stay at home that aren't working, that looks even more stark for them, which is why we have a real opportunity. Let's talk about online learning. Let's talk about skills gaining and narrowing this gap between what the economy needs and what our educational system is producing. If we bring those closer together, then we win long term. But here's the cool thing. That was already the case before COVID. Hopefully now we've just exposed it. But the other thing that I want to make sure, and I touched a little bit about it though with the future workforce, is let's just make sure that the new practices that we're doing, we keep going forward. Flexible schedules, bosses who understand working moms more understanding because now suddenly they have had to work from home with their kids. There's all kinds of things that are specific to the workforce, but then there's also things that are just specific to humanity. And I'll end by just saying that don't forget, after the pandemic of 1918, we had the roaring 20s, and you can't have a better example of people interacting more closely and more involved from a societal standpoint. So future of work will require more skills and training, and we have a real opportunity to highlight that.
Yeah, thanks for that. Janelle, Bonnie, any thoughts there around what roles we need to anticipate and how we help people including employers, prepare for that?
I mean, I think that we are going to need there's a role that is, I think, slowly being defined, but it's this idea of like, get a bunch of sensors and put them in your workplace, and that's what you need. But I think there's certainly intelligence that technology can deliver, but you still need the person in place to make decisions on how you act on that intelligence. And I think it's one of the challenges, Janelle, I'd love to hear you talk about this. It's one of the challenges of government, right? It's like these people weren't trained to, figure out how to understand what's going on with data. And they've also got all their constituency to think of already, let alone these giant data sets. And so I think there is a real need to start to first design it to be human, but to interpret it and understand how to take action. If you're creating, this continual feedback loop, how are you going to put people in place to act on that?
Yeah, I agree. I selfishly, but think that there should be more research analysts out there, more research sort of specific jobs. My role at the Downtown Austin Alliance, I was the first for my organization, and there's not very many of my type. So just the whole concept of being connected with these different industries, being able to pull information from a number of sources, synthesizing it and communicating it is a unique skill that I think more people could learn. And on top of that, you can see that data is needed. A lot of times data is not necessarily used to make decisions, and, data is collected and there's dashboards being created, but the synthesis is not really there. There's not a lot of storytelling there around what we're finding out. How do we use that to create a decision? How do we use that to create recommendations? What are the key conclusions? And so I would say that there is a need for that. additionally, a lot of these jobs that people acquire or maybe that have lost in recent times, there's opportunity for cross-training. And a lot of employees don't really spend the time to encourage employees to sort of learn new skills and cross-train. And right now, because, you're kind of sitting still, there are a lot of incentives to get extra degrees, go online, take extra classes for free, and all of this stuff. And that should always be available. Like we are better, stronger based on what we know and learn and can understand. And I think in every role, you are more effective in your role if you understand all of the other parts. Just like Joseph mentioned earlier, he was on every single level, and it made him more effective to be able to do what he's doing now with the Grayling Group. And so I say that to say that layering on these skills, I think is imperative for all industries, whether you are, you own a restaurant or you are, a manager at a hotel. Like, understanding the different levels allows you to make better decisions, so that when you are asked for a solution or you are asked to work on this problem together, you're not thinking with your same brain. You're not socializing yourself with others with the same exact degree that you have and the same exact skill that you have. Yeah. You are using the information from someone who rides the bus. If you're trying to create a transportation plan and you don't ride the bus, then you should connect with people who also ride the bus. And so I think just that cross collaboration, cross skill, building, I think is critical. And a lot of times it's not built into, our work environment. It's not built into our HR sort of infrastructure. But as we are building buildings that are more resilient, we need to be building employees that can pivot if something changes. If they don't have an online job, there could be something else that they can do so that we can retain their services. So it's just my thoughts around.
It's an interesting point of view that empathy is a necessary ingredient for resilience. And resilience is kind of like the one phrase that's come out of all of this, that whether it's personal resilience, your business's resilience, or your city's resilience, everyone's having to embrace these new ideas and new things. I was on a call the other day with Jake Ward, who's the president of the Connected Commerce Council. So they've got 10,000 plus small businesses. And he made the statement that there is no longer a non-digital business. If you're not embracing digital tools and all the things that comes with that, then you're really not prepared for whatever comes next, whether we're talking about the pandemic or whatever natural disaster. You're simply not as resilient. So I think that is a big awakening that we all need to be very aware of and very vocal about, is that we are living in a digital enabled world and there just is no going back. Here we are. So how are we going to thoughtfully deal with this, and what do we need to do and encourage our policymakers to do to enable that and in a way that's considerate?
While you pause there at the end, Chris in the comment section brought up a good point that I think builds on what you just said, Chelsea, which is for our elected leaders to go back and look at these policies. We have an opportunity now with what I call the tragedy of the commons, meaning that if no one directly works on it or pays for it, no one's going to. So whether it be picking up trash in a park or whatever it happened to be, somebody else thinks it's another person's problem. But right. To Janelle's point, it's about the empathy to realize that no, we are all connected. And if I'm behaving badly because I'm not following social distancing, and then I go into a commons, whether it be a retail or a restaurant or whatever, I just put all those people at risk. And we have a chance to really, really rethink the tragedy of the commons.
Yeah, really well said. Any other thoughts about that? And then we'll go to closing remarks. Okay, good. Wow, we're doing great on time, everyone. We've got 2.5 minutes left. So I'll give you each kind of 30 to 45 seconds on closing comments, and then I'll do wrap-up remarks. Who wants to go first? Anyone volunteer? Bonnie,
I'll go first.
Yep. Good.
I just think entering this as our moment of experimentation, which I said earlier. I think, what are the experiments you want to try? You have permission to try things perhaps you didn't before as a business, even as an individual, right? Like investing in things that we've never done before to kind of just reinvigorate our own souls and beings. And so that would be the question I would leave everyone. What are the experiments you want to try, and being open and able to respond to whatever feedback you receive?
Nice. Great.
So I'll just say very quickly that, having gone from the world of the military and the chaos of combat, you can't have a more cliche parallel to what we're going through, which is this idea of everything's upside down. And in this case, an invisible enemy. But in my particular case in Iraq, it was a real enemy. And then to have to flip all that upon retirement from the Army and learn the language of business, and then flip all that after I sold my company to learn the language of running for Congress. It's almost as if I couldn't be more excited or prepared to help others get through this period, because a lot of people are used to what they know and they are very uncomfortable with change. Whereas in my case, I find myself and my colleagues at Gray Line and the work I do at US Tomorrow, we're very comfortable in the uncomfortable. And so if there's anybody in your audience watching today that I don't know, please, by all means, go to josephkopser.com. Thank you, Chelsea, for that shameless plug. Or find the Gray Line group, because I'd like to help people become a little more comfortable with the uncomfortable nature of this change.
Change is the new normal, right? That's absolutely right. Janelle, final remarks, and then I'll bring it home. Yeah.
I would echo, change is inevitable. Nothing ever stays the same. Just continue to believe in your ability and the ability of your community, and stay active, stay focused, stay informed.
Yeah, great. And in that spirit of change and experimentation, in order to do that, it requires a very specific framework. In order to have that framework and be successful in that framework, you have to have a solid foundation. My personal belief is that smart cities is the avenue to get us there. Data that is collected by devices that are enabled by a very strong digital connectivity infrastructure, and it is absolutely imperative. And I think cities that embrace the strategies and the complexity that goes along with that, will be better prepared to deal with this current challenge and challenges of the future. So thank you all for paying attention, for listening, for your wonderful questions. Really appreciate you being a part of this. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Janelle. And before I forget, thank you, Verizon, for being a supporter of this conversation, and really appreciate you as a community partner. So thanks, everyone, and enjoy.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
And we sticking around for a group photo?
Good idea.
How does that work?
Gonna do it?
Here, wait. If we all look at the camera, I'll go over and take a
Thanks.
screenshot. Here we go. Hold on a second. 1, 2, 3. Now I'll look in the camera too. All right. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. I'll send
Everybody come together. Thanks, y'all.
Bye. Thank you, Chelsea.
Bye.
Take care.